Story 1. It was the kind of night that seemed to stretch on forever. The humidity clung to everything, leaving a sticky residue on your skin, and the air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and distant rain. I had gone out on a camping trip alone, a last-minute decision to escape the noise of the city. My dog, Rusty, a scruffy terrier mix, had been my only companion. We were about an hour into the woods, far from any familiar trail, when I set up camp. I didn't think much of it at first. The silence of the forest, the lack of any other campers. But now, looking back, I know it was wrong. The woods were too quiet. No rustling leaves, no chirping insects. It was unnerving. I chalked it up to nerves, unfamiliar surroundings, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That first night was uneventful, if not a bit uncomfortable. I huddled near the fire, trying to ignore the oppressive quiet that surrounded me. Rusty lay beside me, eyes scanning the darkness. He was usually the kind of dog to jump at every small sound, but tonight he was still. His ears were flat against his head, and he didn't move, not even when I called his name. I woke up the next morning with the remnants of my campfire still smoldering, the air cooler than I expected. There was something about the camp, though. It didn't feel right. The area around my tent was undisturbed, but the trees, they felt too close, the shadows too dark. I convinced myself it was just the odd atmosphere of being out in the woods alone, but even Rusty seemed on edge, sniffing the air and whimpering under his breath. I spent the day hiking, trying to shake the eerie feeling that lingered in the back of my mind. Rusty stayed close, never straying too far from my side. But by evening, I noticed something odd. A faint smell in the air, something sour, like rotten meat. It wasn't overpowering, but it lingered in the wind, growing stronger the further I walked. I couldn't find the source. The smell seemed to come from all around me, as though the forest itself was beginning to rot. That night, I lay in my tent, my ears straining to hear any noise. I thought I heard footsteps outside, slow, deliberate, the crunch of dry leaves underfoot. My heart started to race, but I forced myself to stay still, hoping it was just an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon. Rusty was restless, pacing near the door of the tent, occasionally letting out a low growl. The noise came again, closer this time. I heard the unmistakable sound of a breath, sharp and ragged, just outside the fabric of my tent. My skin went cold. I held my breath, trying to remain as still as possible, listening to the soft rustling. Then, the ground near my tent shifted. Someone or something had been standing there, just out of view. I couldn't move. The thought of confronting whatever it was filled me with dread, but I had to do something. I slowly unzipped the tent, my heart thundering in my chest, but when I poked my head out, there was nothing there. No footsteps, no movement, just the dark, silent forest. Rusty immediately darted out of the tent, running a few feet before stopping dead in his tracks. He barked once, sharp, desperate, and then froze. I followed him, trying to pull him back, but he wouldn't budge, his eyes fixed on something in the distance. I turned, expecting to see a deer or maybe a person walking through the trees, but instead, all I saw was a patch of darkness, a void between the trees where nothing seemed to exist. A strange noise filled the air, like the sound of someone whispering. Rusty whimpered, and I pulled him back into the tent, shaking. The whispering grew louder, but I couldn't make out any words. It was just a soft murmur, constantly shifting like it was circling around me, taunting me. That was when I heard something else, a voice. This one clearer than the whispering. "You shouldn't be here." It was a low, gravelly tone, unmistakable in its intent. I froze, my blood turning to ice. I wanted to shout, to call for help, but my throat constricted, and all that came out was a strangled gasp. The voice came again, closer this time, like it was standing just outside the tent. "Leave, now!" I don't remember how I got the courage to leave the tent, but somehow I managed. I grabbed Rusty by the collar, my hands shaking uncontrollably, and started to pack up my things in a panic. The entire time, the voice never stopped, drifting in and out of the air like a sickening breeze. We didn't make it far that night. The forest had swallowed us whole, and despite all my instincts screaming at me to run, I couldn't leave. I could feel eyes on me. The whispers followed me, growing louder the deeper we went into the woods. I eventually found myself stumbling back to the campsite, utterly lost. The fire had long since burned out, and the night felt oppressive, suffocating. Rusty stopped at the edge of the clearing, his body tense, his hackles raised. And then I saw it, a figure standing in the darkness, just beyond the tree line. I couldn't make out any details, but I knew it was there, watching. My heart raced as I backed away, pulling Rusty close, but the figure didn't move. I ran, and Rusty followed, his paws pounding the dirt behind me. We didn't stop until we reached the edge of the woods, gasping for breath, the sounds of the forest falling silent behind us. Years have passed since that night, but I can't forget the voice, the whispers that seem to come from nowhere and everywhere. Sometimes, when the wind picks up, I swear I can still hear them, faintly calling out from the distance. I don't go camping anymore. Story 2. I was 17 the summer it happened. My parents were away on one of their self-proclaimed reconnection retreats, which meant I had the house to myself for 10 days. It was the kind of freedom every teenager wants. No curfew, no hovering questions. Just me, my best friend Alex, and the long, lazy summer days stretched out ahead of us. Alex had this idea that we should explore the abandoned greenhouse off Route 9, the one that used to be part of an old estate before the owners vanished in the early 2000s. It wasn't exactly a secret. Local kids had been daring each other to go there for years, but no one I knew had actually followed through. The story was that it was cursed, some nonsense about a woman who grew rare orchids and went insane after her husband left her. She locked herself inside and was never seen again. Classic small-town urban legend. But I was bored and a little restless. So when Alex rolled up on his bike with a flashlight and that stupid grin on his face, I didn't say no. We got there around 7. The sun was just starting to dip, casting long shadows over the dry fields. The place looked like it hadn't been touched in years. The greenhouse was a massive thing, overgrown with ivy and half swallowed by trees. Most of the glass panes were shattered or fogged with grime, and inside you could see twisted, wild vegetation curling toward the ceiling. We slipped through a gap in the wire fence and climbed in through the side door. The smell hit me first. Sweet, but not pleasant, like decaying flowers and mold. The air inside was thick and wet, hotter than outside, even though the sun had already started to vanish. There were rows and rows of planters, many broken or tipped over. Some were still full of dirt and dried vines. Others held, I don't know what. Strange shapes, wilted petals with colors that didn't seem real, plants with thick, rubbery leaves that twitched when the wind wasn't blowing. Alex wandered ahead, flashlight beam darting around. "This place is a trip," he said. "It's like a jungle in here." I didn't answer. I was too focused on something I'd just seen. Movement, barely noticeable, behind one of the overgrown shelves. Probably an animal, I told myself. Raccoons or a bird. But my stomach twisted. "Check this out," Alex called. I followed his voice to the back of the greenhouse, where a thick curtain of vines hung from the ceiling. He'd parted them to reveal another room, smaller, sealed off with what looked like hand-built wooden slats nailed together. Someone had tried to close it off. Maybe that should have been enough to turn around. Alex found a gap just wide enough to slip through. I hesitated, watching the vine sway after he disappeared. Then I stepped through. The room was pitch dark, except for the flashlight beam. The air here was colder, more still. Dust floated in the light like snow. There were pots on tables, old notebooks, a small, rusted sink in the corner. Something about it felt preserved, like whoever had worked here had just stepped out for a minute. "Smell that?" Alex asked. I nodded. Stronger here, the sweet rot, but sharper, like something floral trying to cover decay. Then we found the chair. It was just an old garden chair, metal and rusted, but there were straps on it, faded, weather-beaten leather, looped and bolted to the arms and legs. I remember just staring at it, trying to make sense of it. "What the hell?" Alex whispered. His voice didn't echo in that room. It just stopped. There was a notebook on the table beside it, its cover warped with moisture. He picked it up and flipped through the pages, and I could see his face go pale in the beam of the flashlight. "They're experiments," he said. "She was experimenting on the plants, feeding them things, animals, people." He looked up at me. "Dude, some of these entries, she talks about hearing them speak to her. The orchids. She called them her children." I was about to say we needed to leave when something clicked behind us. Not loud, just a quiet click, like a latch. We both turned at the same time. The wooden slats that made up the makeshift wall were closed. I walked up to them, hands shaking. The vines had twisted back into place, completely covering the entrance. I reached to push them aside, but they didn't budge. They were firm, tight against the wood, like they'd grown into it. "Alex," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. "They weren't like that before, right?" He didn't answer. He was staring at the corner of the room. There was something moving, just a faint ripple of motion, as if the air itself was folding inward. The plants in the pots nearest us were shifting, leaves curling upward unnaturally. One of the flowers, an orchid I think, began to bloom right in front of us. The petals opened slowly, revealing a dark, wet interior. And from inside, a smell poured out so strong it made me gag. Under the sweetness, there was something else, something rancid. Alex dropped the notebook and backed away. The vines were creeping toward us now, slowly but unmistakably, slithering across the floor and walls. I turned back to the entrance, pushing, clawing at the wood. My fingers bled. Nothing moved. Then I heard it. Not a sound I could describe easily. Like humming, but made of breath. Like someone exhaling directly into my ear. I spun around, and Alex was staring at something behind me, his mouth hanging open. "She's here," he said. I didn't look. I couldn't. I dropped to my knees, covering my ears. I remember screaming at him to help me open the door, to break the glass, to do something. But he didn't move. He just stood there, staring, like he was in a trance. Then he turned and walked toward the back of the room, toward the shadows. And he never came back. I don't remember how I got out. I must have blacked out. I woke up hours later on the grass outside the greenhouse. The door was open. The vines were still. And Alex was gone. The police didn't find anything. No notebook, no chair, no sign of Alex. They said he probably ran away. That maybe we'd taken something that made us hallucinate. But I know better. I can still smell that sickly sweet scent sometimes, in gardens, in flower shops, even in my room, late at night when the windows are closed. Something in that greenhouse saw us, and it chose me to remember. Story 3. I used to love night swimming. There was something sacred about it. The stillness. The way the water turned black and mirrored the stars. It felt like slipping into another world. That summer, I was staying at my aunt's lake house while I worked a seasonal job at a nearby marina. The town was small, quiet, and the lake itself was mostly untouched. No tourists, just locals who fished or paddled quietly during the day and disappeared by dusk. My aunt was traveling for work, so I had the place to myself. It was old, creaky in places, but comfortable. The dock stretched out over the water like a finger, and I'd often lie on the edge at night, my legs dangling in the cool lake, just listening. One night around mid-July, I couldn't sleep. The air was too warm, and my thoughts too loud. So I got up, threw on my swimsuit, and walked barefoot down to the dock. The moon was full and high, lighting the water just enough to see the gentle ripples. I dove in. The chill was instant, but refreshing. I floated on my back, the stars blurring slightly as I rocked with the lake. I must have stayed like that for 20 minutes, just drifting. It was peaceful, until I heard something. A splash, not far from me. I stopped moving, treaded water, and scanned the lake. I thought maybe a fish had jumped. That's common around here, especially at night. But then there was another splash, closer, heavier, like something falling in, not leaping out. "Hello?" I called, feeling foolish as soon as I said it. No one answered. Just silence. The kind that wraps around your ears and pushes in. I swam back to the dock, not quite panicked, but uneasy. I climbed up, dripping and barefoot, and sat on the edge again, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Just a fish. Maybe a beaver. Maybe even a deer. That's when I saw the ripple. It was far out in the lake, a perfect circle of disturbance in the otherwise still water. It widened, slowly, like something had just surfaced. I didn't go back in that night. The next morning, I tried to laugh it off, told myself I was overtired, that my imagination had filled in blanks that didn't exist. But I didn't swim that day. I stayed busy, reading, walking around town, talking to a few locals I'd come to know. When I asked casually if the lake had any odd wildlife, people just shrugged. "Just fish and turtles," one guy said. "A couple loons, maybe a snapping turtle if you're unlucky." That night, the water called again. It's strange how the mind works. Even though I'd been uneasy, I couldn't stop thinking about it, about the quiet, about how the moonlight hit the surface. I went back. This time I sat on the dock a while before getting in. I watched the water carefully, looking for any signs of movement. There was nothing, not even bugs skimming the surface. That stillness again. Too still. Eventually I slipped in. Just for a minute, I told myself. I didn't hear anything this time, but I felt something. A pressure, like the water was thicker, heavier, like it resisted my movement, just slightly. I floated again, trying to shake it off. But I couldn't relax. I kept looking back toward shore, and then back out across the lake. And then I saw it. A shape in the water. Upright. Just a silhouette, maybe 30 feet away. Too far to see details, but close enough that I knew it wasn't a fish. It was tall, still, almost human. I blinked. It was gone. I splashed back to the dock, frantic, lungs burning. Hauled myself up so fast I scraped my knee. I didn't look back until I was halfway up the path to the house. There was nothing behind me, just the lake, still and blank as ever. I didn't go near the water for the next 2 days. Even walking past a puddle made me flinch. I tried to forget what I saw, Tried to convince myself it was a trick of the moonlight, a branch, a floating log. But on the third night, I woke up to dripping. Not the roof, not the sink. It was rhythmic, wet footsteps on hardwood. I froze in bed, barely breathing. Then it stopped, just outside my room. I wanted to believe it was a dream. I stayed perfectly still until morning. When I got up, the hallway floor was dry. No sign anyone had been there. Except the door to the dock was ajar. I know I locked it. That afternoon, I finally called my aunt. I told her something weird was going on, that I felt like someone had been in the house. She didn't laugh, didn't say I was imagining things. She just went very quiet. And then she said, "I never swim in that lake. You know that, right?" I didn't. She paused. "You know the original owners, the family who built that house. They had a son who drowned there, 17. It was never clear how it happened. Just vanished during a night swim. His body turned up days later near the other shore. After that, his parents sold the place and left town." I didn't sleep well that night. I stayed away from the windows, locked every door. Still, I could swear I heard it again. Soft splashes, far out in the lake. I left 2 days later, cut the summer short. I didn't tell my boss why. I didn't tell anyone else what I saw. But sometimes I dream of water, cold and black and endless, and someone floating just beneath the surface, waiting. Story 4. My cousin Sam and I used to spend every summer at our grandfather's cabin in Vermont. It sat on the edge of a dense forest, near a winding dirt road that barely showed up on maps. No electricity, no internet. Just a fireplace, a generator for the fridge, and books lining every wall. It was isolated in that peaceful, off-grid kind of way, but also in a way that made the nights feel a little too long, a little too dark. The summer we were 16, we stayed there alone for the first time. Grandpa had passed that spring, and my parents wanted someone to look after the place. Sam and I were responsible, more or less, and we thought we were mature enough to handle it. For the first few days, everything felt like an adventure. We chopped wood, made meals on the propane stove, played cards by lantern light. But by the 4th or 5th night, things started to feel wrong. It started with the knocking. We were inside playing gin rummy, the rain tapping lightly against the tin roof, when we heard a knock on the front door. 3 slow knocks. We both froze. There shouldn't have been anyone out there. The nearest neighbor was miles down the road, and no one ever just dropped by in the middle of a storm, especially not after dark. "Maybe it was the wind," Sam said, trying to sound confident, though his voice cracked slightly. I got up, heart pounding, and opened the door. No one was there. I stepped out onto the porch. The rain had eased into a fine mist, and the only sound was the soft creaking of the trees. No footprints, no movement, just the smell of wet pine and earth. I shut the door and locked it, trying to laugh it off. Probably a tree branch. Sam nodded, but he looked pale. The next night, it happened again. 3 knocks, this time at the back door. We didn't open it. The knocking returned every night after that. Always 3 knocks. Always just after dusk. We tried not to talk about it during the day. Tried to convince ourselves it was some weird natural sound we couldn't identify. But deep down, we both knew it wasn't. The knocks were deliberate, measured, human. We checked the woods during daylight, looked for signs of someone messing with us, footprints, traps, anything, but there was never a trace. Just more forest, more silence. One morning, Sam found something hanging from the porch railing, a small, crude bundle of sticks tied together with a scrap of red cloth. It was shaped like a person. He didn't say anything, just held it up for me to see. We burned it in the fire pit, neither of us saying a word. That night, we didn't sleep. We stayed in the main room, lights on, a fire burning. The generator buzzed quietly in the background, and every creak of the cabin made us flinch. Then, at exactly 9:03 p.m., the knocking came. 3 knocks. But this time, it wasn't just at one door. We heard it at the front, then the back, then the side entrance, each in succession, like someone was circling the cabin. I grabbed the axe we kept near the fireplace. Sam had a hunting knife from the kitchen. We stood in the middle of the room, backs to each other, listening. Then the generator cut out. Instant silence. The lights went with it, and we were plunged into total darkness, save for the dying embers in the fireplace. "Nope," I whispered. "We're not doing this." We lit a lantern, grabbed our bags, and decided to make a run for the truck. It was about 30 feet from the cabin, parked under a shed roof. The woods beyond were black and heavy, pressing against the edges of the property. We burst out the front door, flashlights swinging wildly. The air was ice cold, colder than it had been all week. My breath came out in clouds. Sam reached the truck first and yanked the driver's side open. Then he stopped. "What's wrong?" I asked. He just pointed. The inside of the windshield was covered in handprints, dozens of them, small, greasy smudges, like someone had pressed their fingers and palms all over the glass from the inside. I wanted to vomit. We got in anyway, locked the doors, and turned the key. The engine wouldn't start. It didn't even click. The silence outside was crushing. Even the frogs and insects were gone. I could feel something watching us. No movement, just that awful, thick presence. Then Sam whispered, "Look!" Standing at the edge of the tree line was a figure. Tall, thin, unmoving. It didn't come closer. Didn't move at all. Just stood there, silhouetted against the faint glow of the lantern light behind us. We sat in the truck until sunrise, too afraid to leave, too afraid to sleep. When the sun finally rose and the trees began to glow gold and green, the figure was gone. The handprints, too. But we didn't stay another night. We packed everything in an hour, left the cabin unlocked, and drove back to town in silence. To this day, neither of us knows what was out there. We never found footprints, never heard voices, just those knocks, the handprints, and that awful figure watching us from the trees. We haven't been back. The cabin still sits out there, slowly rotting. And sometimes, if I wake in the middle of the night and the wind hits my window just right, I swear I can hear it again. 3 knocks. Story 5. I was 20 when I took a job as a camp counselor in rural Pennsylvania. It was one of those out-of-the-way summer camps tucked deep into the forest, all pine trees and winding dirt trails, with a lake so still it looked fake. The kind of place that loses cell service 5 miles before you arrive. The camp, Green Hollow, had been around since the 60s, and it showed. The cabins were worn but sturdy. The mess hall smelled like old coffee and bug spray, and the lake had its own wooden dock that creaked underfoot. I was assigned a cabin birch, a small one near the edge of the woods, furthest from the main buildings. There were 6 kids under my watch, all boys between 10 and 12. Typical summer camp personalities, some shy, some loud, all of them fascinated by ghost stories and fart jokes. The first couple of weeks passed without incident. We hiked, we swam, we sang around fires. But then, one night around the 3rd week, one of the kids, Noah, told me he saw someone in the woods behind the cabin. A man, he said. He was just standing there, watching us. I chalked it up to campfire stories getting in his head. I even walked him and a couple others around the cabin with my flashlight to prove there was nothing out there. but Noah wouldn't let it go. The next morning, he swore he saw the same man again, just at the tree line, standing completely still. Maybe it's one of the maintenance guys, I told him, though even I didn't quite believe that. Staff wore bright shirts. They didn't just wander through the woods alone. The next 2 nights were quiet. Then another camper, Kyle, claimed he heard someone whispering outside the window at 2 a.m. He said it wasn't a voice he recognized. Too low, too slow. I started to get uneasy. On the 4th night, I decided to stay up for a while after lights out. I sat on the cabin's front steps with a flashlight and a mug of stale coffee. Crickets chirped, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves. Peaceful. Until everything went quiet. You know how sometimes in nature, when something's wrong, it just goes silent? That happened. 1 minute the forest was humming with life, the next it was dead still. Even the wind seemed to stop. I stood, scanned the woods. That's when I saw it. A figure. Tall, male, standing between the trees maybe 50 feet away. I thought at first it had to be one of the other counselors, maybe someone messing around. I called out, "Hey, you okay?" The figure didn't move. I lifted the flashlight and aimed it straight at him. He wasn't a counselor. He wore no camp gear, no shoes even, and his clothes were filthy. Just torn pants and what looked like a stretched-out undershirt hanging off his frame. His skin looked wrong. Too pale, almost gray, and his face, what I could make out, was completely expressionless. Blank. He turned slowly and stepped back into the trees. I didn't sleep that night. In the morning, I went straight to the camp director. I told her everything. She gave me a tired look and said something about local vagrants occasionally wandering through, that it wasn't unheard of. But her tone was off, too dismissive, like she'd given the speech before. I pressed her, asked if it was safe. She nodded, but didn't meet my eyes. Just keep your doors locked at night. That evening, I made sure every window was latched and every door bolted. I didn't tell the kids. No point scaring them more. At 2:47 a.m., I woke up to scratching. Not at the door, at the wall. A slow, deliberate scrape just beside the window nearest my bunk. I sat up, heart pounding. The kids were asleep somehow. I crossed the room as quietly as I could and peered through the blinds. He was there, closer than before. Right outside, his hand dragging slowly across the wood, nails clicking softly. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring straight ahead, like he was listening for something inside. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen. Then he turned his head, just a fraction, and looked directly at me. Not startled, not aggressive, just calm, like he already knew I was there. Then he stepped back and vanished into the woods again. At sunrise, I reported it. Again. This time, they moved us to a different cabin, closer to the central part of camp. But no one offered an explanation. I started noticing how other counselors didn't ask questions. If you mentioned someone in the woods, they either laughed nervously or went quiet. I began to wonder if this had happened before. On the final night of the season, the kids were at the mess hall for a movie. I took a walk toward the edge of the woods, trying to make sense of everything. I don't know what I expected. Maybe proof, maybe closure. Instead, I found something worse. Behind the old supply shed, buried beneath some overgrowth, I saw a clearing with a rotted tree stump in the middle. Around it, someone or something had arranged bones. Small animal bones, mostly, but not all of them. Among the remains was a child's shoe, faded blue, mud-caked, but unmistakably modern. A sticker still clung to the sole, Spider-Man. When I brought it back, the director looked at it, said nothing, and took it from me. That was it. No questions. No follow-up. I left the next day. I never went back. Sometimes I check the news for anything from that town. Missing kids, strange sightings. There's never anything. It's like the place doesn't exist beyond the summer. But I still dream about that man in the woods. He's always standing just outside the cabin, watching, waiting. Not with anger or hunger, just patience. Like eventually, someone will open the door. Story 6. The summer after I graduated college, I took a solo road trip across the western US. Just me, my car, a sleeping bag, and a vague plan. I wanted space, time, and silence before real life started. No itinerary, just scenic routes and national parks. It was early July when I found myself in northern Utah, driving through dusty 2-lane highways and valleys that looked untouched since the Ice Age. Late one afternoon, I pulled off onto a gravel road that cut through low, wind-swept hills. According to my paper map, I'd gone analog on purpose. It led to a primitive campground near an abandoned town called Elsin. I never found the campground. Instead, I found a lone water tower standing crooked on a ridge, its metal frame rusted like dried blood. At its base, there was a clearing with a cracked fire pit and a rotted picnic table. The road ended there. I hadn't seen another car in 2 hours, and something about the quiet felt absolute, oppressive. Still, it was getting dark. I figured I'd sleep in the car and leave at sunrise. The temperature dropped fast once the sun dipped. I wrapped myself in a blanket and cracked the windows an inch. The sky was so clear, I could see the Milky Way. It should have been perfect. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I told myself it was nerves, just too much caffeine and solitude. But then, around 1:30 a.m., I heard something. Footsteps. Slow, careful crunches on gravel. Not an animal. Too deliberate. They circled the car once, then stopped at the rear bumper. I sat up, heart in my throat, and fumbled for the flashlight I kept wedged between the seats. I clicked it on and shined it through the back window. No one. But I swear, I heard breathing. Right there. Heavy. Raspy. Close. I didn't sleep. Just sat with the flashlight in one hand, keys in the other, staring out the windshield as the hours crawled by. When morning finally came, I got out to check for footprints. There were none. No marks, no signs anyone had been there but me. And yet, I felt watched, the way you do when you wake up from a nightmare and can't quite let it go. I told myself to calm down, that I was overtired, but I didn't stay for breakfast. I threw everything in the back and left, tires spitting gravel. The nearest gas station was 30 miles away. I didn't pass a single vehicle on the way there. When I finally arrived, I told the old guy behind the counter what happened. Not in dramatic terms, just mentioned hearing someone outside my car in the middle of nowhere. He didn't look surprised. "Elsin?" he asked. "Near there, I think." "Yeah." He nodded slowly. "You should stay off those roads." "Why?" He shrugged. "Nothing out there but dust and memories." I laughed awkwardly. "What's that supposed to mean?" But he didn't answer. Just rang up my coffee and walked into the back room. That night, I camped at a proper site. 10 other tents around. Lights, sounds, laughter. I thought I'd feel better with people nearby. And I did. For a while. But just past 2 a.m., I woke up to a noise outside my tent. It was the same breathing, the same dragging footsteps. But this time, something scraped against the side of the tent fabric. A slow stroke, like a finger. I didn't move, didn't speak. I was paralyzed. Then a voice whispered, almost too low to hear, "Found you." I must have passed out, because the next thing I remember is the sound of birds and the morning sun cooking the tent walls. When I crawled out, everything looked normal. A family a few sites over was making pancakes. A couple kids were playing tag. No one seemed like they'd heard anything. But on the tent, just beside the door zipper, was a single long slash mark, about 5 inches long, clean through the outer layer. I left again, kept moving. Idaho, then Washington. I stuck to motels, crowded places. I even bought pepper spray. But it followed me, not every night, but enough. A tap on a window, a whisper at a door. Sometimes just that breathing, low, inhuman, wrong. Eventually, I stopped sleeping altogether. I tried talking to people, a park ranger in Oregon, a barista in Montana. Each time I danced around the details. I didn't want to sound crazy. I just asked if they knew anything about El Sun, or the tower I'd seen. No one had, except one guy. He was sitting outside a laundromat in a mountain town. Long beard, leathery skin, the kind of person who's lived out of a backpack for decades. I was folding a t-shirt when he said, without looking up, "You saw it, didn't you?" I stared. What? The man with no trail. The one who doesn't leave tracks. My blood ran cold. He finally looked up. His eyes were glassy but alert. "It picks travelers," he said. "The ones who stop where they shouldn't. It follows them. But not always. It waits until you forget." I didn't ask what it was. I didn't need to. I asked how to stop it. He shook his head. "You can't, but you can keep moving. Never stop in the same place twice." That was 2 years ago. Since then, I've never spent more than 2 nights in one spot. I stay in cities, near people. I keep lights on. I sleep with the radio playing. But sometimes, even in the city, I'll hear it. Outside the motel window, or behind a dumpster while I'm loading my car. Breathing. Slow. Heavy. Like it's patient. Like it knows I'll slip eventually. I never should have stopped at that water tower. But I did. And now, it knows me. Story 7. I never liked the desert. Not really. Something about the way sound disappears out there unsettled me. But when my friend Callie invited me on a photography road trip through Arizona and New Mexico, I said yes. We were both in that weird space after college. No plans, no money, and just enough recklessness to drive 800 miles into the middle of nowhere, chasing light and silence. We stayed in cheap motels, shot sunsets, explored ghost towns. It was the kind of trip that felt dreamy and surreal even while it was happening. But it was also the trip where I learned that not everything in the desert stays buried. It started on our 4th night, outside a small town called Vado. There was an abandoned trading post a few miles off the highway. Locals warned us not to go there, said it was bad ground. That phrase stuck with me. Bad ground. Not haunted, not dangerous, just wrong. Of course, we ignored them. We parked the car at sunset, golden light spilling over rusted gas pumps and a crumbling adobe storefront. It was perfect. Eerie, empty, cinematic. We wandered inside the building, which had long since collapsed in parts. Graffiti covered the walls. Names, dates, symbols I didn't recognize. A mummified coyote lay in one corner. Weird, but not surprising. The desert does strange things to time and flesh. Callie was setting up her tripod when I noticed something out the window. A figure, maybe 100 yards off, standing perfectly still, just beyond a dry riverbed. Cloaked in shadow, head tilted at an unnatural angle, almost like it was listening. I blinked. It was gone. "Did you see that?" I asked. "See what?" "There was someone out there." Callie shrugged. "Probably a hiker." But something in my stomach turned, like my body knew something my brain didn't want to accept. We stayed another 30 minutes, taking long exposures as the light faded. Then we left. Or tried to. The car wouldn't start. Battery was fine, gas tank half full. But every time I turned the key, the engine would whine and sputter like something was choking it from inside. We sat there for a moment, the desert growing darker around us. The silence was absolute. "We'll sleep in the car," Callie said. "Try again in the morning." That was the plan. But around 2 a.m., I woke up to a tapping sound. Slow, deliberate, on the passenger window. Tap. 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 I thought maybe it was wind, a branch, something harmless. But when I sat up and looked out, I saw him. The same figure from earlier, standing right there, face inches from the glass, except he didn't have a face. Just a smooth, sunburned surface where features should have been. No eyes, no mouth, just skin. I couldn't scream. My throat locked. He didn't move, didn't blink. Then, as if flicked away by a sudden thought, he turned and disappeared into the dark. I must have made a sound, because Callie woke up. "Did you see him?" I gasped. "Did you see his face?" She looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "What are you talking about? There was someone here, right there." She got out of the car with a flashlight and did a full circle around us. Nothing. No prints, no movement. Just sand and wind and cold. I didn't sleep again. In the morning, the car started like nothing had happened. No trouble at all. It was like the desert had let us go. We drove fast. Didn't stop until we hit Santa Fe. I wanted to forget about it. I really did. But later that night, as we unloaded our gear into the cheap motel room, Callie froze in the doorway. "What's wrong?" I asked. She was staring at the side of the car. Scratched into the dust of the rear window, in tall, perfect letters were 2 words: "Stay out." We didn't write it. We didn't stop anywhere long enough for someone else to do it. We both knew it hadn't been there that morning. We left the next day, cut the trip short, took the fastest route home. Weeks passed. Summer ended. I got a job, moved into an apartment, tried to put it behind me. But then things started happening. The tapping came back, sometimes on my window at night, even in the city, sometimes on the mirror when I brushed my teeth. Always in threes. Tap, tap, tap. I saw him again, too, once at the edge of a parking lot, once reflected in a store window. Just standing, watching, waiting. I stopped sleeping, started keeping lights on. Then, one night, I woke up and found a line of desert sand on my carpet, leading from the front door to my bedroom window. I moved a week later. But it didn't matter. The sand followed. Callie called me not long after that. I could hear it in her voice. Something had changed. She didn't joke anymore. She whispered, even when she was alone. She said he'd started appearing in her dreams. Said she could hear him breathing now. "He's not just a thing out there," she said. "He's part of it. And once you see him, once he knows you saw, he never lets go." That was the last time we spoke. She disappeared 3 days later. No note, no warning. Her phone, her camera, her laptop, all left behind. Police found her car in a drainage ditch outside Vado. No sign of struggle. No sign of her. Just tire tracks leading in, and none leading out. They called it a missing person case, but I know better. I know where she went. She went back to bad ground. And I think someday I will too. Not by choice, not by accident, but because he's waiting. And eventually, he'll want us both. Story 8. I used to love house sitting. Quiet neighborhoods, a free place to stay, a stocked fridge, and a little cash on top. It felt like getting paid to live someone else's calm life for a few days. I did it all through college, especially during the summers when families would vanish for long vacations and needed someone to water plants and bring in the mail. It was easy money. This story happened in July of 2019. I remember because it was the hottest summer I could recall, the kind of heat that makes everything feel just a little more brittle. The house was in a gated community just outside Charlottesville, Virginia. Big, empty, white brick thing perched at the edge of a forest. The owners were a retired couple spending a month in Europe. They were referred to me by a former client. Very polite, very normal. Their house was spotless, decorated like a catalog page, faux wood beams, farmhouse decor, a grand piano in the corner of a living room no one sat in. When they gave me the tour before leaving, the wife mentioned something I didn't think about until much later. "Oh, and don't go into the basement. Nothing down there but old boxes and mildew. We keep it locked anyway." I nodded, didn't ask questions. I never needed a basement. The first few days were normal, boring even. I watered the succulents in the sunroom, brought in Amazon packages, took care of their ancient golden retriever Henry, who mostly slept in his bed by the sliding glass door. At night, I'd read or stream movies on their huge flat screen, sipping iced tea and enjoying the peace. But around the fourth night, I started hearing the noises. It was always around 1 o'clock or 2 a.m. A soft thud, like something falling, then dragging, long, slow drags, like a rug being pulled over concrete. At first I thought it was Henry, but when I checked, he'd be dead asleep, paws twitching, tail still. Once or twice, he even raised his head like he heard it too, ears up, body stiff. But he never barked, never growled, just listened. I told myself houses make noise, wood contracts, pipes shift. I'd heard weird sounds before. Then came the fifth night. I woke up in the dark, sweaty and confused, with the distinct feeling someone had just whispered my name. I lay still, listening, and then I heard it. From the basement, 3 knocks. Not loud, but deliberate, spaced apart. Knock, knock, knock. I stared at the ceiling, heart pounding, brain racing. The basement was locked, right? I hadn't touched it. I hadn't even walked near the door. But now I had to check. I had to be sure. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and padded barefoot down the hallway. Henry followed, pressing close to my leg. The air near the basement felt colder somehow, like the AC had pooled there. I stood in front of the door, white paint, old brass knob. I put my hand on it. It was unlocked. I froze. Had it always been? I couldn't remember. I'd assumed it was locked because they told me not to go down. But now I wasn't sure. "Hello?" I whispered. Ridiculous, I know. But silence is worse when it answers nothing. I opened the door slowly. Pitch black. The air smelled of damp cement and something faintly sour. I didn't go down. I closed it again, locked it this time. I told myself someone had just forgotten to lock it before leaving. I tried to sleep, but I kept waking up. That dragging sound again, muffled, below me. It went on for the next 2 nights, always late, always faint, always followed by those 3 slow knocks. On the 8th night, something changed. When I got up that morning, the basement door was wide open. Henry was sitting 5 feet away, staring down the stairs, not barking, not whining, just frozen. I called out his name, and he didn't move. I had to tug him away by the collar. After that, I slept with the bedroom door locked. I kept the lights on. I stopped listening. But I couldn't stop dreaming. Every night, I had this same dream. I was standing in the hallway, and something was whispering from the basement. Not words, just sounds. Breathing, almost. Then I would feel someone standing just behind me, impossibly close. I'd turn around and wake up. 3 nights before the couple returned, I decided I was done. I packed my stuff, left a note on the kitchen counter, and locked the place up. I didn't care about the money. I just wanted out. The next day, I got a text from the owners. Just one line. "Did you go into the basement?" I didn't reply right away. Something about the wording made my stomach twist. Not why was the door unlocked? Not was everything okay? Just that question. I waited a day. Then I lied. Said no, of course not. Everything was fine. They never responded. A month later, I got a call from the woman who referred me to them. She was crying. "They're dead," she said. "The couple. They were found in their basement." I sat down, legs numb. What happened? They don't know. It was strange. The police said there was no sign of forced entry. No trauma. They were just there, lying at the bottom of the stairs, holding hands. I didn't know what to say. And, she added, voice cracking, they were buried under boxes. Old, heavy boxes. Like someone had piled them on top. "Someone?" I whispered. They said it must have been an accident. But they weren't under those boxes when they died. That's what the medical examiner said. It happened after. I haven't house sat since. Sometimes I'll be drifting off to sleep, and I'll hear a knock. 3 soft taps on the wall, not loud enough to be sure, just enough to make me wonder. And a few weeks ago, I had a dream I was back in that hallway. Only this time, I didn't turn around. I walked down the stairs. And something was waiting at the bottom. Not a person, not even a shape. Just a presence. Cold, thick, and angry. I think it knows I lied. And I think, one day, it'll come looking. Not loud enough to be sure, just enough to make me wonder. And a few weeks ago, I had a dream I was back in that hallway. Only this time, I didn't turn around. I walked down the stairs. And something was waiting at the bottom. Not a person, not even a shape. Just a presence. Cold, thick, and angry. I think it knows I lied. And I think, one day, it'll come looking.